as we know, there are a few sort of decolonisation ideologues in the Australian Parliament, not quite to the state of Antifa, thankfully, but we know they're there. Recently, not only did the Greens support an amendment of the Parliament Statement of Support for Israel to assert that Israel had committed war crimes and to call for a ceasefire, the Greens were actually backed by the Sydney Teal MPs Kylie Tink and Sophie Scamps, and they faced a massive backlash, including from Jewish people in their own electorates. Rukshan, have these Teals found out what happens when, for lack of a better term, you try to play both sides?
I think so. I think it's. I think we did have a Teal in a more of a electorate in Victoria that's got more of a Jewish population who didn't back this. So there is a bit of politics at play here. As we're seeing though with the Greens, with some of these politicians in our parliament, their inability to understand Australian values and Western concepts when it comes to dealing with these issues is very concerning. At a base level, we should be expecting our politicians to be able to disavow terrorism, no matter where it happens. And this whole thing that they're doing where they're justifying acts of terror or by saying that there's also this other bad thing that's happened, we shouldn't be participating in those type of things. We should have a baseline of what we condemn. Okay, it's another thing then later to hold another country like Israel to account if, there's breaches of international law, there's war crimes. Yes, we do that as well in Australia, but we can't do this thing where we're playing both sides and saying, well, it's kind of okay in this instance because they're also, committing war crimes or the history of war crimes, whatever, however they phrase it. I think it's very important as Australians that we should anticipate that our politicians are going to go out there and say, no, we don't accept terrorism. Because if it happened on our shores, if some people came into, some town in Sydney, took a whole bunch of people, hostages, murdered a whole heap of families, can you imagine if our politicians got up there and said, hey, perhaps it's justified considering what happened in the past in Australia because of the history.
Yeah.
That's not cool. And I think the way that it's going that way, and I think the Greens, as much as they're being activists or whatever in the parliament, the people now in Australia, if you pay attention, you're seeing them for what they are.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. Really, we're seeing them for what they are because in this moment, I don't believe they've risen to the occasion of actually being what true leadership is, which is condemning terrorism, and then doing other orders and stuff to condemn other countries. That's fine, but be able to condemn terrorism solely by itself without making excuses.
Yeah, I mean, that should absolutely be the baseline. It's not a high standard to reach for sure. Now, Rukshan, before we go, I've got to get your comment on this. I mean, Anthony Albanese seems very baffled and infuriated that Australians wouldn't vote for his voice without further information. He just expected them to vote yes simply because some Indigenous leaders said they should. I thought it was the equivalent of the trust the experts rhetoric of the COVID years. Do you think that emphatic no vote reveals Australians are finally sick of that trust the experts mentality?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think COVID, for all the bad that we saw from it, I think a lot of people became more aware of the messaging around these things. And people really took I know we say that people didn't take an interest in this, but people did take an interest in this by ignoring some of the messaging that was coming their way. Because it was a full frontal attack, right? You had John Farnham, the voice. You had all these celebrities. It was a full-on attack on the senses of the people. Very emotive attack as well in terms of, I'm saying these ads to change people's hearts and minds. But I don't think that was enough anymore. It wasn't the same as celebrities going out there on TV and saying, "Oh, get the jab and we'll go back to work in 2 weeks" or whatever. That didn't fly in this instance. And again, this was the inability, like you mentioned, of Albanese and others involved in this in the Yes 23 campaign to share details with the public. So it's good to see that Australians, without having details, are less willing to vote for something. It's a very good thing to see.